So okay, so Brad Pitt, he's suing ex-wife Angelina Jolie over the French vineyard sale to, and this was before the whole Ukraine thing happened, but a Russian oligarch. So I can imagine that at this point he is even more, anti this whole transaction, not even necessarily because of a political statement by him, but because of the fact that it's potentially a business liability here to be partnered with someone like that, given all of the sanctions and everything else that have been going on. But this is from like 4 or 5 days before the invasion of Ukraine started and all of the sanctions and everything that have followed. But basically what happened was when they were married, they purchased this vineyard in the south of France, and they turned it into a winemaking business. And according to the allegations, Brad Pitt was the one that it really turned into a labor of love for him. And he really put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into turning it into a profitable business. And it ultimately has become one. And they had apparently an agreement between the two of them that they would not sell their shares to someone else without the express agreement by the other person. I don't know, based on the reporting, whether this agreement was in writing or whether it was verbal, but that is entirely possible that they may have purchased this property and turned it into a business and given one another a essentially like a right of first refusal, right? So, but it seems like she basically just decided, no, I'm going to spite him and I'm going to sell to this Russian oligarch so that he can be in business with this other guy instead. And if that is in fact an agreement that they had, this is something that he definitely can sue for, because now being partnered with someone entirely different can very much impact the business. And if you don't want to continue working with someone else because either you don't think that they have good business sense, or you think that, that they're going to take it in a different direction than what you want, or all kinds of reasons why you might not want to partner with someone else. And this is before the whole, the political climate really changed. Those are all valid reasons for why you might not want to be essentially forced to be in business with someone. So
I'm trying to think whether there would be any basis to say that the statute of frauds would apply in this situation. I'm struggling to come up with any reason to think.
I mean, I would imagine that this has got to be in writing somewhere.
Okay, but let's assume they were husband and wife, and they were just like, okay, this is something like, look, we understand that we each have let's assume they each have their own assets, okay, yeah. And they never commingled their assets in general. Maybe some assets were commingled, others, large portions of their assets were not. Okay, so now they go out and I guess, and let's assume they contributed separately or jointly, it doesn't even matter, I guess, in the purchase of this property and in its development. And they basically say the property has been jointly in their names, I guess, and she's selling her, because it's real estate that's part of this, right? It's not just a business thing, presumably. I mean, we don't know enough about the structure of the business. It could be that they jointly are owners of an LLC that's owning all this stuff here. So I think we need to know more about the documentation and what she actually sold, so we can have a better understanding as to what principles are going to govern here. In other words, if everything is owned by an LLC and she sold her interest in the LLC, so there's already an operating agreement that's associated with the LLC, which would dictate as to whether or not she has a right to sell it. And unless there's something in writing contrary to the operating agreement, that's going to govern. Contract. The general rule in contract law is contract always governs.
Yes.
And you look at the four corners of the document, and whatever is there is there. Whatever is not there is barred by what they call the parole evidence rule. So that's how it's going to work with respect to who's going to win here, assuming it's structured that way. If it's not really structured, and it's really, a lot of it was just husband and wife having oral conversations and understanding between themselves, well, then you might get into questions as far as statute of frauds and stuff like that. It's difficult to believe they would buy property under the names Angelina Jolie and Brad and Brad Pitt. That seems it seems much more likely that they would have bought it under some corporate structure. They're not,
Right.
because you would think that they have enough people around them who, you know, between lawyers, accountants, and stuff like that, that there's no way that they would have start a company that they're trying to make a successful business, and it's going to be owned by Brad and Angela, and that, you know, it's in their individual names. There has to be some sort of corporate structure here, and she sold it within that corporate structure. So really what you need to do is you need to look at the documents and see and figure out whether or not she complied with the terms that are set forth therein. So I think we need more discovery here. That's what we really need.
Yeah. I think Joe's right on the money. I think the fact that they're married is irrelevant to this analysis. I think what matters, as Joe has sort of indicated, is what's on the original deed and what is, you know, so what's on the original deed, who actually made the purchase or purchases, and then what sort of operating agreement there is. And this is going to be principally a matter of contract law at the end of the day. The first thing that comes to mind in this entire analysis, for me at least, is just the idea of like joint tenancy and period. So like, you know, because you can own, when two people own property, you can own it a couple different ways. They have tenancy in the entirety, joint tenancy, you know, things like that. So like in a joint tenancy, you know, if you have two people or multiple people own the same piece of land, which can happen, most common for a will, by the way, although not as much maybe today, but, you know, where you divest and bequeath, you know, the estate to multiple people at the same time, so they have a joint tenancy. It's like one of the ways to undo that is basically like you basically sue to break it up, and you can break up each person's individual interest and basically buy out everyone's individual interest. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. But this is going to turn on the particulars of the agreement. And if I were a betting man, if you're just kind of going under default rules, my presumption is that the nature of the agreement is that, you know, you can't sell it without the permission of the other person.
Yeah.
You know,
which actually makes a lot of sense, right? In any kind of a partnership agreement, because you're not just, you know, it's not like you're just selling your shares of stock to somebody else. Like, you're selling control over an actual company that someone else is very much involved in.
Yeah. You can understand someone saying, "Hey, I didn't want to become business partners with Putin because you decided to sell to him."
Yeah, exactly.
You know, or Hunter Biden. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I do agree. My guess is that this is a situation where they do have a written agreement. They do have a corporate entity, because, you know, this is also, these are two American people, and this is land that is not in the United States. So it seems like the safest bet would probably be that this is owned by some kind of a corporate entity of some sort, if not for taxes, for liability reasons. You know, there could be all kinds of reasons. And these are two very sophisticated people, right? Like, they've been Hollywood A-listers for a very long time. Undoubtedly, they have a whole lot of people around them that are accountants and lawyers and, you know, finance people. I would not be surprised if they had a bunch of people that helped them structure this whole thing. But my understanding is that they bought it together, I think, before they got married, and they actually had their wedding on this property, is my understanding. And so I do think that would indicate also further that they probably entered into this with a lot of legal documentation and, you know, corporate setup and all that kind of stuff.
And the term sophisticated that Alita just used is actually a term of art that attorneys use to distinguish from some common layperson who doesn't understand the significance of something.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean sophisticated like someone who knows how to dress well and carry themselves with grace. It actually, or it doesn't even mean someone who drinks tea with their pinky sticking out. It means actually someone who understands enough about the business world that we can expect them to we'll judge them by a different standard than somebody who just fell off the watermelon truck yesterday.